Well, hello, good evening, comrades. I'd just like to welcome everyone to Animal Farm. And since you're all here today, I'd like to introduce you to a couple of special animals here on the farm. But before I do that, I just want to remind everyone that all animals are equal. So let's meet a few. This cute little pig here, I know you can see him. His name is Snowball. Say hi, Snowball. Isn't he cute? This little pink pig. Then we have another pig. He's a little bit fatter and darker on the top, and his name's Napoleon. Say hi, Napoleon. And then here we have our strong workhorse. His name is Boxer, and he does all the hard work on the farm, so we really like him a lot, like to have him around. And then we have our loyal dog here, Jessie. Hi, Jessie. Woof, woof. And Jessie gives birth to a lot of puppies on the farm, so she's an important part of the group. And then we also have a random cow here. She will, I'm sure, do some work at some point on the farm, but as of right now, she doesn't have a name. She's just a cow. And then we also have this rooster here, which this rooster is not a main character. He doesn't actually have a name, but he does wake everyone up in the morning. So he's always, going cock-a-doodle-doo and all that good stuff. So he's still important, but just a rooster. Okay. So these are just some of the main players that we have here on the farm, and of course I'll introduce you to everyone else here in just a minute. But now that you've met a few of our friends here, or as we say on Animal Farm, our comrades, let's talk a little bit about the book. So let's start with George Orwell. He is the author of Animal Farm. Definitely need to know that. He is a noted novelist, a critic. He wrote a lot about politics. His two most famous books down here at the bottom of the screen, Animal Farm and 1984. And all of those were works about, totalitarianism, Stalinism, communism, things like that. He had a lot of fears and problems about those kind of governments. And his most famous line from his book, 1984, is still used today, and that's, "Big Brother is watching you." So if you watch, the TV show Big Brother, where they have the cameras everywhere and you're always being watched, that was kind of one of his major fears. So he came up with the Big Brother concept in that book, 1984. So this is a picture from that book, Big Brother is Watching You. It was published in 1949, but he was looking to the future, which at that time was 1984, where he presents this futuristic state where the government controls everything. Your thoughts, where you live, where you work, everything. So that's where this whole idea kind of came about, of this leader who takes over and controls everything. And he was definitely considered an outsider for his beliefs. He viewed communists as repressive and dangerous, and he was very skeptical of governments and didn't like one group or one person having all the power. So that really made him uncomfortable and nervous. So, you might be thinking, well, why did he choose animals, in this story? Well, there's a couple of reasons, and the first one is, he thought about this idea of what would happen if one day animals did just revolt, against humans and say, no, I'm not going to work, and no, I'm not going to, sit down when you tell me to, and no, I'm not going to do whatever you say. And those thoughts kind of inspired him to write this book. So Animal Farm is considered to be a masterpiece of what's called political satire, and we're going to talk more about satire later on. But basically, it's a tale of oppressed individuals. In this case, they're played by animals, these characters, who long for freedom. And the story traces the conditions that the animals live in. They live on this farm where the owner of the farm doesn't feed them all the time. He forgets. He doesn't take care of them. He really mistreats them. He whips them sometimes. And they just eventually get tired of it and decide to overthrow the farm and take over. So he really tries to create this society where the animals could easily be humans, but in this case, they are just animals. So what's the significance today? Well, obviously the characters in this book have allegorical meanings, which we've talked a lot about allegory this year. An allegory is basically a story in which the characters represent bigger ideas or even other people. So in this case, he's trying to create a communist world on this farm where these fabulistic animals really stand for much bigger meanings, and one of those is mainly the abuse of power. How easy is it for humans and animals to be manipulated and abused by whomever is in power? So Animal Farm is not just an allegory or a satire, it's also considered a fable, which is one of the oldest literary forms, in which you go all the way back to children's books, things you probably read as a kid, like The Tortoise and the Hare and things like that. So a fable is simply just a story that uses animals to teach lessons. So keep that in mind. We really are supposed to learn something from this in terms of a thematic idea, but he uses animals to teach us that lesson. Most fables have two levels of meaning. On the surface, the fable may just be about animals, but on the second, the animals stand for types of people or ideas, which again leads into that idea of an allegory. So even though the animals are represented in the book, they really do have bigger connections to history and even other figures, even today. So Animal Farm is strongly allegorical, but it presents a nice balance between levels of meaning. So on the first level, it's really easy to understand. The story is about animals on a farm. But at the same time, each animal serves as a symbol. So you really have to look at it in a deeper way. Oh, there's Boxer again. You see the picture of him there. The story's second level of meaning is really a critique by George Orwell to comment on what was Soviet Russia at the time. So let's talk a little bit about that. Again, I don't think I need to go over allegory again, but just so you can see, it does have several layers of meaning. So all of the animals really are symbolic. So that's something to look for while you're reading. Okay, I think we've talked about allegory enough. Not sure why my PowerPoint's going backwards. Okay, well, let's talk about satire. In a satire, the writer attacks a serious issue by presenting it in a ridiculous, light, or otherwise poking fun at it. Orwell uses satire to expose what he saw as the myth of Soviet socialism, meaning this dream of what Russia could be like, but it really wasn't the truth. So keep that in mind. Some of the things that happen in the book are really silly. Like it's going to seem absurd to you. Like, why are the animals, marching around and singing? Well, again, it's meant to prove a point. It's supposed to be poking fun at something that really did happen in history during the Russian Revolution. So satire may not seem, LOL type funny, but it is meant to be silly, and it's poking fun at something. So keep that in mind while you're reading. Also, irony kind of goes along with satire, because we know a lot of the things that are going on the farm because we're humans and we can figure them out as readers, but the animals, because they are animals, they don't have the ability to figure out certain things like we do. So Orwell uses a lot of dramatic irony in the book, so that we can see how easily the animals are manipulated. So we might want to say, hey, Snowball, we know what's really going on. But unfortunately, he doesn't, because he's an animal, and he doesn't have the ability to reason, like some of the other characters in the book do. So just keep that in mind, too. We know a lot more than the characters know in the book. Again, we talked about satire, a lot about hypocrisy, meaning the animals say they'll do one thing and then they do another. Their faults are greatly exaggerated, so that you can kind of see really how twisted they are in what they are really trying to do on the farm. So that's part of the satire too. So let's talk quickly about some historical connections that you can make between history and Animal Farm. So one level of allegory in this book is the connection to all of these major players from the Russian Revolution. So you can see some of them here with their pictures, like Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, Joseph Stalin, and Tsar Nicholas. So we'll talk a little bit about all of these figures. So let's start with Stalin first. Again, he came into power after Tsar Nicholas was overthrown and defeated Trotsky, who was trying to gain power after Lenin was killed during the Russian Revolution. And he was very totalitarian in his methods. He wanted all power, and it was his way or the highway. And he was vicious. He would use military tactics where, millions were killed. If you talked about overthrowing the government at all, you would be killed automatically. Just a very violent man. So in the book, we can compare Napoleon to Joseph Stalin. Okay, Napoleon is one of the pigs who leads the rebellion, and again, he kind of becomes the most powerful pig on the farm. So he's compared to Stalin, who was the communist dictator of the Soviet Union for several years, and he also used the KGB, as you might know, the secret police, to enforce his corrupt antics. Then we have Farmer Jones. He's the one who owns the farm. He's very irresponsible. He lets the animals starve. He doesn't take care of them. And we could compare him to Tsar Nicholas, who was a very weak leader in Russia and really, due to his own faults, was overthrown because he was very cruel to his subjects. And then we have Snowball, who's another one of the pigs, and he's very intelligent, he's well liked, and he really wants to implement the values of what the animals call animalism. And he can be compared to Leon Trotsky, a communist leader who was influenced by the teachings of Karl Marx, and he really did want to improve life for the people in Russia, but unfortunately the KGB did not allow him to do that because Stalin didn't want to compete with him for control of Russia. Old Major, we can compare to Karl Marx, who was the inventor of communism. He wanted to unite the working class in order to overthrow the government, but unfortunately he never really got to see that happen. But his philosophies did turn into what's called animalism. Alright, so that just about covers Old Major and Karl Marx. And again, father of communism, a German intellectual, someone who really did have a plan for the revolution, but unfortunately he never really got to see it through. Then we have Squealer, who is also another one of the pigs, and he becomes kind of the propaganda animal, meaning he uses different catchphrases and manipulative language to get the animals to follow what he wants them to do. Then we have Boxer, who I introduced to you earlier, and he's one of the strongest animals on the farm. He's kind of the workhorse and represents the working class. Jessie, there's the sheepdog, and again she keeps tabs on the pigs and has all the puppies. And then Moses, sorry I couldn't find a raven to introduce to you, but he represents religion. He's always ranting about this place called Sugar Candy Mountain, and it's not a real place, but again it's meant to kind of manipulate the animals and make them believe in something so that they'll work toward getting to go to that place, but it doesn't actually exist. Here's some other characters. We'll talk about them more in depth later. Probably one of my favorites is Benjamin. He's the donkey, and he's the cynical guy, meaning he doesn't think the revolution will fix anything. Nothing's ever going to change. Everything's bad. He's very negative. Molly is another horse that you'll hear about later. The sheep and the dogs. Okay, so the group of dogs represents the KGB. So we'll talk a lot more about these characters later on. And a few other things. Animalism, of course, can be compared to communism, and that is the form of government that the animals come up with on the farm. Whoops, let me back up for a second. So another thing to remember that I mentioned at the beginning is, again, all animals are equal. So that is kind of the basis of animalism. They don't have any contact with humans. Humans are bad, but all animals are supposed to work together for the good of the farm. So just a couple things to remember. Number one, Animal Farm is a satire, meaning it's made to poke fun at something serious, which is this idea of government control, which is something that really scared George Orwell. So keep that in mind while we're reading. We're going to work through most of the book together, but you have to read it a little bit more critically than you would a simple work of fiction. So those are a couple things to keep in mind. So say bye to all the animals. Bye, guys. Bye. And we'll start reading.